Hello, this is a short video about the so-called Kennedy-Lincoln coincidences. Many have noted that there are a number of striking coincidences surrounding the events of the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln and then later that of President John F. Kennedy, 100 years later, in fact. To run through some of the well-known coincidences, Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860, while John F. Kennedy was elected in 1960. Both presidents were slain on a Friday. They were both next to their wives at the time. Each of the succeeding presidents was surnamed Johnson. That is, Andrew Johnson succeeded Lincoln, and then Lyndon B. Johnson succeeded Kennedy. There are also a few peculiar coincidences regarding their alleged assassins. Both John Wilkes Booth and Lee Harvey Oswald were Southerners that held political opinions that ran contrary to the wider mainstream. They each have three-part names with the same total number of letters. Both were killed before facing trial. It's interesting that the Ford Theatre was the setting for the assassination of President Lincoln, while President Kennedy was struck while in a Ford Cadillac. One of the supposed coincidences surrounding the assassins goes like this: that John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln in a theatre and then escaped into a warehouse, while Lee Harvey Oswald shot Kennedy from a warehouse and then escaped to a theatre. But this is where the coincidences seem to stretch credulity after all. I mean, Oswald was in a book depository in Dallas, while Booth he first fled on foot, then on horseback, and ended up in a barnyard many miles away after a long chase. So there is an attempt made by people to, I guess, read coincidences in. When they start to see coincidences, they look for more, and they kind of fit the prevailing data to the expectation of some sort of coincidence. The mythos surrounding the story of the alleged assassins functions as a superb piece of propaganda for the establishment, who would prefer it if the wider public did not look too closely at the circumstances surrounding Lee Harvey Oswald. Subconsciously, one tends to think of a symmetry between each of the assassins, reinforced by so many apparent coincidences. Yet in spite of this consideration, it must be said that many coincidences are too difficult to ascribe to mere chance. Kevin Williams produced a fascinating tabulation of coincidences surrounding many figures in the American political landscape. In a sense, the only recourse of people who subscribe to a stock standard theory of scientific materialism is to assume that the world must be full of coincidences. To give just one example, he outlines the circumstances surrounding the actions of a group of Confederate saboteurs in New York during the American Civil War in 1864. The superintendent of police in New York was named John A. Kennedy at the time. The Confederate saboteurs' attempted shenanigans happened to be on the same day that three Booth family members were performing Shakespeare's Julius Caesar in New York. Only one of the Confederate agents was apprehended, who just happened to be named Robert C. Kennedy. His trial was presided over by General Fitzhenry Warren, making it a sort of analogue for the Warren Commission. Incidentally, it was the Superintendent John A. Kennedy who had warned Lincoln of an earlier assassination attempt in 1861. I assume that there's no relationship between John A. Kennedy and Robert C. Kennedy. The term synchronicity, as it was coined by Carl Jung, is certainly relevant when thinking about the Kennedy-Lincoln coincidences. Kevin Williams raises this at the end of his work and suggests that Jung was, quote, transfixed by the idea of life not being a series of random events, but rather an expression of a deeper order. Kevin Williams also relates this to other concepts such as karma and reincarnation, near-death experiences, and so on. And in terms of the Kennedy-Lincoln coincidence, it seems that some other sort of non-materialistic explanation is relevant. The coincidences appear to point towards some deeper level of trauma in the American psyche connected with the neglect of important civil rights issues. Both assassinations functioned as a sort of punishment for raising the consciousness of average everyday citizens to the neglect of civil rights. In the case of Abraham Lincoln, of course, freeing the slaves, emancipation. In the case of Kennedy, it was mainly the general shift towards a focus on civil rights, which ultimately precipitated the civil rights movement.
100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes, and all its boasts will not be fully free until all its citizens are free.
So sadly this observation would suggest that future events may continue to repeat the same patterns until some deep-rooted transformation of human consciousness is achieved.